Okay guys, we have an NTSB report on a deadly fire on board a box ship in Houston, Texas. This was published by the Maritime Exclusive on February the 20th, 2025. The NTSB has released its investigative report on the deadly blaze aboard the aging box ship Stride, which sustained an engine room fire at the port of Houston early last year. The fire was caused by the installation of the wrong kind of valve, which led to an overflow of fuel into the engine room. On January the 8th, 2024, she was alongside the Barbarous Cut Marine Terminal and taking on bunkers. The chief engineer and the third engineer were in the engine room to monitor the transfer, and they began bunkering sequence by lining up valves to put diesel into the port and starboard diesel tanks simultaneously. The transfer began at 3:05 a.m. at a slow speed, and then at the chief's request, ramped up to a maximum pressure and flow rate. All was normal until 3:25, just 20 minutes later, when the wiper, who was on the third deck of the engine room, saw diesel dripping down from the upper levels. He ran to the engine room and alerted the chief and the third engineer, who began yelling on the radio. The tanker man on the bunker barge and the captain of the bunkering tug both heard excited chatter on the VHF, and the tug master ordered the tanker man to shut down transfer immediately. The tanker man shut down the pumps right away and valved off the discharge. At about this point, the crew member stationed on the Stride's bunker manifold said the pressure gauge spiked to about 30 psi, up from zero just moments earlier. Minutes later, at 3:30, a fire and explosion occurred in the engine room, sending flames up to 6 feet out the open engine room hatch. The captain heard the blast, ran to the bridge to shut down all emergency stops, including the ventilation fans, the boiler and oil pumps, and he sounded the general alarm. On the captain's orders, the crew sealed the hatches and the ventilation ducts to the engine room, with 3 crew members still inside. The crew ran out fire hoses and began boundary cooling on the outside of the engine room. At 3:36, the chief engineer reported by radio that he, the wiper, and the third engineer were still trapped. 2 minutes later, the fire team suited up and attempted to enter the engine room, but could not because of heavy smoke. They tried again at 3:45 through the entrance on the upper deck, but were repelled by fire. At 3:50, one member of the fire team made it inside, but could not locate the missing crew members before he had to retreat. Shoreside fire teams arrived at 3:43, along with the fire boat, which provided boundary cooling. A local fire department leader recommended discharging CO2 in the engine room, but the master refused since he still had people inside. At 4:15, the fire crew finally managed to reach the engine control room. The blaze was out, but the space was filled with thick smoke. They found the victims, only the wiper was still breathing, and the paramedics pronounced the chief engineer and third engineer dead on the scene. At the fire department's request, the engine room was sealed and filled with CO2 for 24 hours to ensure that the blaze was out. After the fire, diesel fuel was found on all decks of the engine room, dripping out of the funnel casing and coating the interior of the funnel. It was poured in large quantities around the base of the main engine. The fire damage throughout the engine room was so extensive that the 27-year-old ship was declared a constructive total loss and scrapped. Investigators found that the starboard side fuel tank had overfilled, and the pressure pushed fuel through the vent pipe 8 decks up the funnel. The fuel then flooded out of cracks in the badly repaired cutout section of the vent and dripped back down the funnel casing. Class found that 3 of the owner's other vessels had the same cutout in the vent. Weeks prior, the ship's outgoing chief engineer had ordered the wrong valve as a replacement for the angle stop valve on the port side diesel tank. The new valve was a one-way check valve, not a stop valve, and it was installed in an orientation that prevented any diesel from going into the tank. even when the valve was normally open. When the oncoming chief engineer lined up the valves to fill both port and starboard tanks at the same time, he was actually filling only the starboard tank, since no fuel could get past the check valve and into the port side tank. The starboard tank rapidly overfilled, then sent excess diesel up the vent pipe, causing the casualty. This is just very sad. The person that screwed up wasn't even there, and that's very unfortunate. 2 men died in this terrible incident. The ship was lost, and one guy, don't know how bad he was. He was lucky he survived. But wow, all over a valve. The wrong kind of valve. Seems crazy when you think about it, but all it takes is one simple mistake to cause such a terrible accident. Rest in peace to the 2 men who lost their lives, and condolences to your families.